A few hours later, the exploration team reached the first 15 growth area. The trees here were noticeably sparser, replaced by vast stretches of colored clouds on the ground, as if they had stepped into a fairyland. It was no illusion. The colored clouds were actually the fallen leaves of the 15. When a breeze passed through, the carpet of colored leaves rolled like turbulent waves, a truly magnificent sight. The team leader wizard examined the vegetation attentively. Compared to 3 years ago, this area had undergone subtle changes. He frowned. The 15 here are thriving, but the place is taken by double-headed demon bulls. There are quite a few of them. Dozens of double-headed demon bulls occupied the growth area. Each beast had 2 heads, able to release different 20s from each at the same time. Their scaled hides made them highly resistant and dangerous, far tougher than the lantern monster apes they had met earlier. The herd stirred as the exploration team approached, growing restless. A massive bull, clearly the leader, issued a warning rumble. Frost steamed from both of its mouths. The air itself seemed to chill. "Let's go," the team leader wizard decided. "This herd's not worth provoking. Forcing them out could cost us lives. We'll move on to the next growth area." He waved the team onward. The woodland was rugged and slow to cross. They traveled from dawn until noon. The landstrider bird that Matthew rode was beginning to tire, while the 2-legged pack beasts in the center of the column remained energetic. Those pack beasts weren't natural animals, but biomodified creatures created by wizards, hardy, adaptable, easy to care for, ideal for long journeys. After a while, Matthew spotted a strange old pine not far off. Where the trunk met the canopy, there were peculiar white markings that, up close, looked like a wrinkled human face. "Face pine?" he said, a flicker of recognition on his face. He had read the description in the illustrated guide to magical creatures. A face pine doesn't start out magical. An ordinary pine tree can, with great age, develop white patterns that resemble a human face. Once a face forms, the tree becomes sentient and is considered a magical plant. Face pine is relatively rare and prized. It's used to refine potions that slow facial aging and remove wrinkles, hence the name beauty-nurturing pine. The team leader wizard noticed it too. "Encountering a face pine during the day, our luck's holding," he said. "Face pines are dormant and less aggressive in daylight. At night, they can be hard to deal with." Logistics wizard Al handed the team leader a small knife. Taking it, the team leader called to the others, "Keep an eye out for me," and approached the marked face. He plunged the knife in along the edge of the white pattern. Though it was a tree, bright red sap flowed from the cut like blood. The sleeping face snapped open, enraged, and emitted a piercing, unpleasant shriek. The branches shivered with a pale glow, as if about to cast 25. The other wizards quickly fired counterspells to interfere. The team leader's hands were steady. With a few quick strokes, he sliced the white-patterned face free. The instant the face was removed, the old pine withered at an alarming rate. In a short while, the lush trunk had collapsed into nothing but charcoal black wood. The detached patterned face stopped bleeding. Its features froze in a wooden, carved expression. The team leader looked toward Madame Jill's twin granddaughters, apparently seeking their judgment. The younger twin, Lilith, brightened immediately. "This counts as something we all found together, so split it evenly," she said. "This piece of face pine is quite large. Cut into 24 portions, everyone can refine a few batches of beauty-nurturing potion. If anyone doesn't need theirs, sell it to me. I'll buy at 108 per gram. And if anyone wants the potion recipe, come to me. Market price is 808. The recipe has trading restrictions and requires signing a 25 agreement. It can't be resold." The twins looked almost identical, but their personalities differed. Vivian, the elder, was taciturn. Matthew hadn't heard her speak since introductions, while Lilith was outgoing and eager to trade. The team leader sliced the face pine into 24 equal weights and distributed the pieces. Matthew received over 20 grams, enough to try refining several batches of the potion. He didn't sell his share. He wanted to attempt the refinement himself, but he still needed the recipe. "Miss Lilith, I need a beauty-nurturing potion recipe," Matthew asked. "No problem," she replied, her smile widening at the prospect of gold. The rest of the day wasn't so fortunate. The 15 growth areas they found in the afternoon were all occupied by powerful magical creature clans. As evening fell, the exploration team selected a place to make camp. They set the bonfire artifact in the center, which provided a comfortable warmth. Al, the logistics wizard, located a small river nearby and set to work on dinner. Fitups. Al minced venison very finely, mixed it with seasonings to make a rich meat filling, and wrapped it in thin dough skins shaped into rectangular 22. Using Ballage 25, he constructed a meter-high tandoor pit and kindled magical flames at the bottom that burned continuously. He stuck the prepared buns to the inside walls of the pit and occasionally dabbed them with salt water to keep them from charring. Matthew bit into one. The thin crust was crisp, like a cracker with a hint of salt. When he broke through, savory meat juices burst across his tongue, and the full aroma of the filling spread through his mouth. After a few of the 22s, he sipped the fish soup to clear the richness. "All cooks well," Link, sitting beside him, said. "These 22s are excellent." Matthew nodded and ate a few more. After dinner, he practiced his meditation method in the camp for a while. Even with potions to keep him alert, he couldn't skip sleep entirely. He felt a twinge of apprehension about being pulled back into that mysterious mist world, but he was scheduled for the second half of the night watch and decided to take a short nap. He drank a 11. After taking one, only 2 hours of sleep were needed to fully restore his energy, and he lay down in the camp. 62. Entering the dream again. Matthew was jerked awake by the familiar sensation of falling. He sat up fast and scanned the surroundings. The others in the camp were gone. The bonfire at the center of the camp burned with an ashen-white glow, and beyond its circle, everything was swallowed by the same endless gray mist. He had been pulled back into that strange gray mist world. As expected, I'm in it again. The good news is that glowing antlered girl isn't here. He muttered. He rose, drew his 13, and kept a wary eye on the mist beyond the firelight. The landscape looked different from the last time he had been here. That confirmed his suspicion. This was the god's kingdom that Jack had entered using the dream entry ritual. Though the terrain could vary, that world was always wreathed in gray mist and prone to bizarre, shifting changes. According to the Mining Brotherhood, those who used the ritual had to find a glowing rift to leave. Intersection nodes where this world touched the real world. They called the spots around those rifts treasure lands. Entering from different places, or even from the same place at different times, could deposit you in completely different locations. Getting lost in the mist was the greatest danger of the ritual. Matthew wasn't particularly worried about getting lost. He had the power to travel back at any time, so he didn't need to search for a rift. That made his explorations far safer than anyone else's. This time, he planned to head out and scout the area beyond the camp. He floated the invisible hand under himself and pushed into the mist. The landscape resolved into clusters of enormous stone pillars, black at their bases with dark red veins running through them. Their surfaces were as smooth as marble, and they stacked into strange, varied terrain. Every pillar and platform floated in midair. The platform under his feet drifted just like the rest. Through the gray haze, he could make out more floating pillar plates stretching outward, with gaps between them that opened onto an almost endless void of mist below. The entire architecture drifted slowly, shifting positions. When he glanced back, the bonfire camp was gone, vanished without a trace. Once you leave the starting point, you can't come back, he thought. He didn't want to test the effect of falling, so he kept the invisible hand supporting him and moved cautiously forward. Not long after, he encountered inhabitants of the place, creatures made of the same stone as the pillars. They looked vaguely like the beetle-like species he'd seen in the winter forest. Rhinoceros beetle-shaped, roughly the size of a microwave oven, with a spiral, drill-like horn on their heads. More than a dozen of these horned stone bugs rose toward him from the floating pillars. Their winged backs seemed ornamental. They floated rather than flew, moving faster than the drifting pillars, but not quickly. Matthew urged his 13. Streams of flame licked out from its tip and engulfed the swarm, yet the bugs remained unharmed. Huh? Immune to fire, he said, surprised. He flicked the tip again and sent out a blue bolt of light. It struck the horned bugs but produced no effect. Matthew had little choice but to put distance between them. He backed the invisible hand away. The bugs were not swift enough to catch him, and soon there was a comfortable gap. He felt a flicker of irritation. The creatures in this world were odd. His usual Salevim techniques did nothing. Studying the nearby pillar clusters, he realized the horned bugs were composed of the same black and dark red stone. An idea formed. He stopped the invisible hand midair and attempted a transfiguration on one of the pillar clusters. The stone did not respond. So that was it. The material itself repelled his Gresh 11. The horned stone bugs were the same stuff. Matthew pulled a solid iron ball from his pocket, summoned an invisible hand, and flung it down at a pillar from height. The impact sent a thunderous clap through the air. The iron ball left a deep dent in the pillar. A faint smile tugged at his mouth. So, 11 isn't the only way. He used transfiguration to reshape the iron ball into a giant hammer, then had the invisible hand wield it. The stone bugs closed the distance, and Matthew swung the massive hammer. The blows shattered some bugs outright and sent others tumbling into the misty void beneath the platforms. After a few powerful strikes, the whole swarm lay in pieces. Matthew picked through the fragments. A faint red light, visible only to him, seeped from the stone shards and flowed into the 8 in his mind. These stone bugs contained absorbable energy. After collecting all the shards, he had gathered enough to supply a single-dimensional jump. That matched the cost for traveling between the Wizarding World and the Hogwarts world. Because the Grey Mist realm lay relatively close to the Wizarding World, the energy he had spent returning from it last time had been negligible compared with the cost of crossing to the Hogwarts world. He compared the bug fragments with chips taken from the pillar clusters and confirmed they were identical in composition. When he pushed magical power into the stones, he could feel them actively repelling 11. He even discovered that the 0 could not contain items made of that material. That disappointed him. If he couldn't put them in the 0, he couldn't carry many. Still, the stone's immunity to 11 made it valuable in its own way. Portus, he tried, intending to make a 10 so he could return to the exact spot later. The spell failed. The space in this world felt unstable. A portus couldn't be anchored here. He would have to memorize the location on the Wizarding World instead. He resumed moving forward with the invisible hand. After a while, a vast dark shape loomed through the mist. He drifted a few dozen meters closer and recognized it. A stone tree over 30 meters tall, its trunk pitted with many hollow cavities, uncannily like the bird-song pine from the winter forest. As he came in range, his expression shifted. A dense swarm of stone bugs burst out of the holes in the tree, pouring into the air in a writhing cloud. 63. Guidance from the Deer Antler Girl. The giant tree before Matthew was built of stacked rectangular pillars, each with a black base and dark red patterns. From a distance, it looked like a pile of toy blocks, reminding him of the Lego toys he had played with in his previous life. The stone trunk was pockmarked with dozens of holes, not like the insect-trapping cavities of the bird-calling pine, but nests for a colony of unicorn stone bugs. A dense swarm poured from the hollows and surged straight at him. Matthew repeated his earlier tactic. He took out a solid iron ball, reshaped it into a long iron rod, and used the invisible hand to swing it through the swarm. The unicorn stone bugs stood no chance. Those struck by the rod shattered into fragments and fell from the air. For a moment, it looked like rain of black stone shards. It didn't last. There were simply too many bugs. Even as Matthew kept the invisible hand swinging the rod, the swarm overwhelmed him. When the unicorn stone bugs reached the invisible hand, their long, dark red patterned horns, black at the base, pierced it. The invisible hand dispersed, and the ungoverned iron rod fell through the gaps between the stone pillars, disappearing into the endless gray mist below. Matthew immediately summoned a second invisible hand beneath his feet and retreated. Like the earlier insects he had encountered, these stone bugs flew slowly, and Matthew was able to leave them behind. Using the iron rod against such a vast colony was inefficient. Ordinary 6 was ineffective against them. Worse, these stone creatures seemed made of material that suppressed magical power. They could break through his defensive effects. Without that shield, he could not risk diving into the swarm to collect the shattered fragments, and without touching them, he could not absorb the red energy from their corpses. There was no point in lingering here. This valley was full of these colonies, better to look for solitary stone creatures. He floated on and soon passed many petrified forms, stone versions of winter forest beasts, each hovering in the air like the stone beetles. He came upon a floating stone two-headed bull that looked very much like the two-headed magical bull he'd seen in the winter forest. Matthew pulled another solid iron ball from his pocket. He had made plenty of them back in the Muggle world, so losing one didn't bother him, and launched it. The bull didn't charge like the beetle swarms. Instead, it opened both mouths, and a dark glow flared. Two beams of shadowy light lanced toward him and instantly disintegrated the semi-transparent polygonal shield he'd set up. He dropped under the beams with the invisible hand at his feet. They passed harmlessly overhead. The bull tracked him, repeatedly firing dark beams. Matthew fled using the invisible hand beneath him, while another invisible hand directed the iron ball at the bull's heads. The bull swung its left head and fired at the incoming ball. The dark beam struck the iron sphere and instantly turned it into a smooth stone orb, black at the base with dark red patterns. The invisible hand lost control of it, but momentum carried the stone ball into the left side of the bull. The left half of the bull shattered into blocks along with the stone ball. Can it really restore its body by consuming this kind of stone material? Matthew wondered. The shattered bull wasn't dead. It used its intact head to eat the surrounding stone fragments, and the broken half slowly began to knit itself back together. At that moment, the bull abandoned attacking and focused on rebuilding. Matthew stood back and watched, curious how long it would take. After nearly 100 breaths, the bull's repair finished. It had even swallowed the stone ball that had been his iron sphere, and in the process an extra head had formed. The two-headed bull had become a stone three-headed bull. It can evolve by consuming stone material, but its intelligence is very low, Matthew muttered. This place is full of stone like that, yet these creatures don't actively use it to evolve. He waved his fingers, and 3 solid iron balls waiting in the air slammed into the creature. The bull fired its dark beams at them and transformed them into stone balls, but the 3 spheres still crashed into it and shattered the three-headed bull into fragments. Matthew approached and touched the fragments. A burst of red light, visible only to him, streamed from the blocks and was absorbed into the phosphor in his mind. The red energy in one stone bull equaled roughly that of 2 or 3 unicorn stone beetles. The amount of stone material produced by smashing one bull was comparable to the fragments from 10 beetles. Clearly, the red energy contained in a body wasn't directly proportional to its size. Just as he was about to continue his search, a faint silver-white glow caught the corner of his eye. Matthew turned and saw the antlered girl he had met before. He didn't notice when she had appeared at the edge of the gray mist. Her upper body was clearly visible. Below the waist, she remained shrouded in mist, only a pale, silver-white gleam of skin showing through. A cold fear rose in Matthew's chest. This time the pressure was unmistakable, a heavy, invisible force radiating from a powerful being. As before, the antlered girl slowly raised her right hand, her 4 fingers held together, and pointed with her index finger in a particular direction. Matthew activated the 4 in his mind. The scene in front of him began to stretch. He endured the discomfort the activation brought and focused on the direction she was indicating. The place she pointed at was still covered in endless gray mist. He could not see what lay beyond. But as his perspective lifted, the entire world below became an expanse of gray. Looking down along the line she had pointed, Matthew glimpsed, buried in the mist, a faint but enormous black shadow, something vast and lurking. 64. The Gossipy Wizard. Matthew jolted awake at the bonfire camp, gulping air as if he'd been pulled from drowning. The choking sensation came as soon as he left the gray mist world, and his perspective rose. Again, that intense pressure, the same suffocating drowning. The court wizard, who had been on watch the first half of the night, saw him stir and came over to signal that it was now Matthew's turn. With the others still asleep nearby, Matthew made no sound and only nodded. He slid out of his sleeping bag and sat by the central fire, turning the events in the mist world over in his mind. He picked up a twig and prodded the burning logs as he thought. Just as I left the gray mist world and my view rose, I saw a huge dark shadow, he mused. The antlered girl pointed in that direction. Does she want me to go there? The first time I left the mist world, it was too rushed to observe anything. I can't be certain she pointed the same way then. Next time I enter the mist world, if I meet the antlered girl again, I can confirm it. From both of his encounters, the antlered girl seemed only to try to guide him somewhere. She had never shown any hostility. After a while, the Merchant Guild's watchman swapped in. The guildman was talkative. After sitting a while, he drew Matthew into idle conversation. "Are you from White Stone Town?" the man asked. "I've been cultivating in seclusion until recently," Matthew replied. "I haven't been in White Stone Town long." The man, Victor, didn't care about Matthew's origin and went on. "I came from the royal capital. There are just too many wizards there. It's hard to grab resources. Madame Jill is generous. This job's reward is more than enough. Once I finish this mission and get back to the capital, I can try to break through to become a formal wizard." Matthew glanced at him. Victor sounded like an old general boasting before battle. "It's best not to talk about things like that when you're on a mission," Matthew warned. Victor blinked. "What's wrong with that?" Matthew smiled. "People say speaking of future success while on a mission can bring bad luck." Victor snorted. "I've never heard that. We're guild members. How can we believe in superstition? We haven't been cursed, so words can't do anything to us." Matthew resumed poking at the logs. "I was joking. Don't mind me." Victor shrugged and continued, "But we really haven't been lucky. The 2 herb growth areas the guild marked on the last outing aren't suitable for establishing collection zones. Starting tomorrow, we'll have to find new ones. The winter forest is huge. Who knows how long we'll be searching?" Matthew nodded. He didn't mind staying in the winter forest a little longer. Here he didn't need the cumbersome dream entry ritual. Sleep alone took him back into the mist world. Staying would let him continue exploring it. He still hadn't found the mysterious plant from Jack's memories. He hadn't forgotten that the transformative material Jack used to create variants came from that plant. "Have you ever seen a shadow white deer?" he asked. Victor shook his head. "No, I don't even know if they still exist here. I looked into it before taking the job. People used to find them in the deep area of the winter forest, but it's been ages since anyone's seen them. The last recorded sighting was hundreds of years ago. Legends say they're the spirits of kind souls and will guide lost travelers out of the forest, but in reality, they're just a rare species of magical creature. With so many other magical populations here, a low-number species easily dies out. So there's a good chance we won't find them," Matthew said. "We still have to help Vivian and Lilith look after we finish exploring." Victor tried to be reassuring. "Don't worry, Madame Jill isn't cruel or stingy. Even if we don't find one, she'll still pay handsomely." Matthew accepted that. The odds of finding something that hadn't been seen for centuries were slim. Victor leaned closer and lowered his voice. "I heard they're looking because they took a commission from the Witch's Spoon." "The Witch's Spoon?" Matthew asked. He didn't know that organization's name. Victor nodded. "Vivian and Lilith are members. Their mentor found a 1,000-year-old elixir recipe, and the ingredients require the antlers of a shadow white deer." Victor sounded a little envious. That elixir is said to massively accelerate the growth of magical energy. If they find a shadow white deer this trip, Vivian and Lilith might break through to become formal wizards. Formal wizards under 20 are rare in the capital. Matthew said nothing. He could potentially reach that level without any ancient recipe. He was already a 3rd-level wizard apprentice. For most, the accumulation needed to push their magical energy to break through standards would take years, even a decade. In this life, his natural talent was excellent, and with the help of elixirs from the Hogwarts world, his magical energy had grown quickly, drastically shortening the accumulation period. He estimated at most a year to finish and reach the threshold. "I don't have such excellent elixirs," he thought, "but I've already done much of the accumulation in time. I just need Madame Jill's reward to buy the last auxiliary elixirs to break through to formal." Victor adjusted his tone. It won't be long before I break through too. Good luck, Matthew said quietly. They didn't dwell on the actual odds of success. After a little more idle talk, dawn smeared pale light over the horizon. The rest of the exploration team stirred and packed up, ready to head out and resume the search for herb growth areas. 65. Weasley's Snowball. Matthew woke in the dormitory after nearly 8 or 9 hours of sleep, the longest rest he'd had in days. He was back at Hogwarts. Since he'd entered the winter forest, he'd been spending his days exploring and his nights fighting monsters in the mist world, and the accumulated exhaustion had finally caught up with him. He decided to stay on campus and recuperate. There would be plenty more chances to gather red energy in the mist world, and he wasn't short on the fuel needed for travel. This morning's lesson was herbology, held in the greenhouses. It was snowing outside the castle. Winter at Hogwarts insisted on snow the way the sea insisted on waves. Soft, downy flakes fell like a great curtain, decorating the castle and the surrounding woods in a blanket of white. The normally glittering lake was frozen solid, and some students were already skating on the ice. As Matthew stepped out toward the greenhouses, he found a group of students embroiled in a snowball fight. "Hey, Matthew," someone called. "Join us." Fred and George Weasley were hurling snowballs in his direction. Matthew cocked his head and dodged. "I'm on my way to class," he said. "If I remember correctly, you two have herbology too, don't you?" "Just for a little while. Professor Sprout will forgive us." Fred shot back, sending another snowball. Matthew drew his wand and, with a light flick, bounced the missile back. It struck George square on the face. "That's not fair." George wiped snow from his nose and drew his own wand. He muttered a spell at the snow on the ground, several balls of compressed snow floating up into his hand. With a sharp flick, they streaked toward Matthew. "George is a genius," Fred crowed, and he, too, conjured and hurled a volley. Matthew held his wand like a practiced fencer and parried the incoming barrage, deflecting snowballs one by one. Other students heading to the greenhouses stopped, drawn into the contest. Imitating the Weasleys, they plucked snow from the ground and enchanted it into flying pellets. Before long, the air filled with white spheres as Gryffindor and Slytherin students, and anyone else caught up in the fun, lobbed enchanted snow at one another. The melee grew chaotic. Nobody could tell who was responsible for which incoming hit. At that moment, Professor Quirrell passed by and was promptly struck several times. He spluttered, "What do you think you're doing? It's almost time. For class. Go to class." His voice trembled with anger, but with so many students gathered, he didn't deduct points. Doing so would have decimated the house scores for both Gryffindor and Slytherin. When the professor spoke, the crowd paused. Then, a few charmed snowballs smacked the back of the turban wrapped around Quirrell's head. Fred laughed. "Professor, it's not time yet. Come and play." Matthew's eyes narrowed. The Weasleys' snowballs had landed on the face of Lord Voldemort after all. If Voldemort still had a body, Matthew imagined, he would be livid. Instead, the fury manifested through Professor Quirrell, whose face had gone ashen. He stammered, You. For a long moment, Quirrell's mouth trembled without forming a full sentence. He was terrified. Matthew could sense the raw anger radiating from the man, and he could sense Quirrell's frantic mental pleas for forgiveness. No reply came from the presence behind Quirrell's head, and Quirrell let out a quiet, relieved breath. Then, struggling to regain a stern authority, he said, in a voice that still quivered, "You, disrespecting a professor. 10 points from Gryffindor. Tonight. Go to Filch for detention." Fred scratched his head. It seemed extravagant. An invitation to a snowball fight, punished by point deductions and detention. "What are you all doing? Get to the greenhouses for class." Professor Sprout called from inside. It was class time, and when she stepped outside, she found a large knot of students a short distance away. They dispersed at once, hurrying toward the lesson to avoid further sanctions from Quirrell. Matthew watched Quirrell the whole time. Lord Voldemort was hidden very carefully. If Matthew hadn't known what to look for, he might never have suspected the Dark Lord's presence. Even Dumbledore might not have known, not until Quirrell's behavior gave it away, perhaps when he went into the Forbidden Forest and things went wrong. Dumbledore had used the Philosopher's Stone as bait to draw out whatever threat was hiding at Hogwarts, but he did not know everything from the start. Before the Chamber of Secrets incident, Dumbledore hadn't known about Horcruxes. At this point, he could not be sure of Voldemort's exact condition. Matthew judged that Quirrell hadn't yet begun hunting unicorns in the forest, which meant Voldemort must still be weak. The little item Matthew had bought in Hogsmeade was still in his pocket. If he wanted to trade it with Quirrell, the best time would be before Quirrell started hunting unicorns and strengthened the Dark Lord. Today's herbology lesson was on Devil's Snare. The Devil's Snare is a magical vine. A mature plant lashes out with constricting tendrils like a serpent to ensnare anything that comes near. The more its prey struggles, the tighter it squeezes, often to deadly effect. It's a dangerous specimen, which is why Professor Sprout had students working with seedlings. Devil's Snare prefers dark, damp conditions and hates light and warmth, so the seedlings were kept in dark boxes and the students were to transplant them into pots. Matthew picked up a clump of the small, blackish vines. They twined around his fingers tightly, pulling with surprising strength, but being only seedlings, their grip was more comical than threatening. He eased the roots into the soil in his pot, careful not to tug too hard. You couldn't force your way out of Devil's Snare without tearing the plant apart. "Lumos," he said. The tip of his wand flared, and the Devil's Snare recoiled, releasing his fingers immediately. When he finished, he glanced around. The task was simple, and most students had already completed it. Only a few stubborn ones were still trying to rip themselves free by sheer brute force, refusing to use light or reason against the plant's constriction. 66. Draco the Little Leak inside the Room of Requirement. On the dissection table in the center of the room, Matthew was working on the sandworm monster corpse he had brought back from the Mistworld. The creature had already been dismembered when he began, and what he found was startling. The sandworm monster had no internal organs. Its abdomen was nothing but piled flesh and blood, without any recognizable organ tissue. Where the neck joined the body, there was a cyst the size of a head, which Matthew suspected might be the creature's core. The little sandworms on its neck were equally strange. None of them had the organs a normal sandworm should have. Like the monster's lower body, their interiors were just masses of flesh and blood. "This thing definitely wasn't born naturally," Matthew muttered. He set down the scalpel, lit the furnace built into the wall, and threw the corpse in to be incinerated. The Room of Requirement wasn't just equipped with a dissection table. It also had a furnace for disposing of experimental waste. Meow! Preserved Egg, roused by the sound of the furnace, stretched, extended, and yawned. The cat had come into the Room of Requirement with Matthew today as usual. Since learning the meditation method, Preserved Egg had been receiving Matthew's lessons in ancient runes whenever he had time. To advance in the meditation method, one must construct a runic model inside the runic matrix. A runic model couldn't be made by copying shapes. You had to fully grasp the rune's meaning to build one in the matrix. That made Preserved Egg's progress slow. Matthew often brought the cat along to ancient runes classes. After disposing of the remains, Matthew took off his protective gloves and scrubbed his hands in the nearby basin. "Preserved Egg, use your clones to watch Professor Quirrell's movements," he said. The cat looked up at him, puzzled. Matthew dried his hands. "Place your clones so they can monitor the road to Hogsmeade. If you see Quirrell heading that way, alert me immediately." Preserved Egg nodded, stood, and flicked its tail. The tip split into several small black fur balls that landed on the floor. They quickly expanded into copies of Preserved Egg. Several black cat clones slipped out of the Room of Requirement, some taking up positions in windows and behind walls with sight lines to the Hogsmeade Road, others heading straight for the village to hide near the entrance. After tidying the lab, Matthew went straight to the Great Hall for a meal. "Is this some new rune toy?" he asked, spotting Jerry holding a palm-sized green frog model. Gerald wasn't eating with them. He seemed to have taken up some new pursuit. Matthew had seen that frog in many hands lately and assumed it was a passing fad. New rune-based gadgets showed up among students from time to time, and Matthew rarely cared for them. "The frog wallet isn't a toy," Jerry said with a mysterious grin. It's great for handling your finances. Financial management? Matthew blinked. Jerry came from a branch of the Abbott family that had long since split off. Their finances weren't exactly lavish. That made Matthew even more surprised to hear him talking about money. Jerry explained, "You feed the frog wallet 10 galleons and it spits out a new frog. That's how everyone else got theirs." "It doesn't look worth 10 galleons, Matthew said, frowning. The frog was ugly. Perhaps his aesthetic sense was behind the times. "There's more," Jerry added excitedly. "The frog that eats 10 galleons will spit out 1 galleon every day." Matthew took the frog. It was slightly springy. Press it, and it deformed, then popped back into shape, and it occasionally twitched like a toy. That mechanism, eat 10, return 1 a day, set off alarm bells in his memory. In his previous life, he'd seen similar schemes on the news, recruiting people to farm leeks. If left unchecked, someone would start getting people to pour money into this just to generate more returns. But galleons had anti-counterfeiting runes on them and were issued through Gringotts. You couldn't turn raw gold into galleons outside the bank. If the frog wasn't made by Gringotts, any galleons it produced had to have been put into it by previous owners. "Did the frog already spit one out?" Matthew asked. Jerry produced a galleon from his pocket. "It just dropped one when I came into the hall. I've checked. It's real." Matthew examined it and could clearly sense the anti-counterfeiting runes. It was genuine. He handed the frog and galleon back to Jerry and said seriously, "It's fine to play with it, but don't invest too much. Galleons don't appear out of thin air, and if someone is profiting, someone else is losing." Jerry shrugged. "I'm only messing about with one. Don't worry, I don't have much pocket money to throw at it." A commotion erupted at the far end of the Slytherin table. A crowd of students had gathered, and curious pupils from nearby tables were crowding over. Matthew and Jerry went to see what the fuss was about. The tabletop was covered with frog wallets. Draco Malfoy was feeding galleons into them one after another. Matthew counted roughly. There were at least 200 or 300 frogs on the table, which meant Draco had poured in 2,000 or 3,000 galleons. Matthew rubbed his chin. He could see what was happening. Draco was about to be the bag holder, the one left holding the losses. "Draco, where did you get so much money?" he asked. Draco turned, ready to flaunt the Malfoy family's wealth, but when he saw Matthew, he flinched and admitted, "I borrowed it." Chapter 67, King of Leeks, Draco. In truth, Matthew and Draco were cousins. Draco's mother was a black too. Draco had always been afraid of Matthew. When they were children, Draco's maternal grandfather, Cygnus Black, had hosted a birthday party and invited almost everyone connected to the House of Black. That was the first time Draco met Matthew. After learning Matthew's name, he wanted to make friends. Full of the usual Malfoy confidence, he walked up behind Matthew and tried his practiced friendly approach. "Matthew Black," he said. Matthew turned and popped an eyeball candy into his mouth. "Yes?" The confectioner had a wicked sense of humor. When Matthew bit down, a syrup that looked like blood squirted from the candy, splattering all over Draco's face. "I think you would be very happy to gain the friendship of a Malfoy," Matthew said, deliberately slow. Draco's bravado faltered. When he wiped his face and saw it covered in the syrup, he burst into loud wailing on the spot. The incident scarred him then, and ever since he'd felt an irrational fear of Matthew. Now, seeing Matthew again, Draco blurted out the truth without meaning to. "You borrowed the money?" Matthew frowned. "If I were you, I'd stop investing more." The Malfoys were wealthy, but Draco's pocket money wasn't, and he couldn't throw around thousands of galleons. He'd borrowed several thousand just to seize what he thought was a fortune-making chance. Thinking he stood to make a huge sum, Draco's tone hardened. "Matthew, you're being too conservative. Playing it safe won't make you rich. Profit comes with risk. You can't gain without taking chances. Only those who dare to dream, who dare to act, make money. In 10 days, I'll have my capital back. After that, I'll make several hundred galleons a day." His lackeys watched with admiration as Draco fed galleons into the money frogs. He planned to put in the full 5,000 he'd scraped together. Matthew and Jerry returned to their table and continued their meal. Jerry popped a cookie and asked, curious, "Are you so sure nothing will go wrong?" Matthew sipped his tea and bit into a croissant. "Unless every frog has a Gringotts goblin inside constantly minting galleons, things will go wrong very soon. Jerry nodded. True, if all the Hogwarts students combined fed tens of thousands of galleons into those things, they'd have to spit out thousands every day. That's terrifying. Matthew smirked. Don't worry, you've got Draco to back you up. Jerry shrugged. I just hope he doesn't lose too badly. After they finished, Matthew and Jerry headed back to the common room and ran into the Weasley twins in the corridor. Fred was making urgent signals. Matthew understood and told Jerry to go on ahead. Fred grabbed his head dramatically. Something big has happened, George added. There's a problem with our new product. What new product did you? Matthew froze, eyes widening. Don't tell me you made the money frogs. Fred, you guessed right. Clever Black. Help us think of something. George, think of something, quick. Matthew was bewildered. How did you make them? What were you thinking? Fred sighed. We actually wanted to invent a savings wallet. Lots of young students have bad spending habits, so we thought a wallet that wouldn't let you withdraw willy-nilly would help. The plan was that once money was deposited, you couldn't take it out until a preset withdrawal time. But George's part went a bit wrong. George threw up his hands. You were nagging me to hurry. How was I supposed to be careful? Fred continued. The withdrawal scheduling failed, and it turned into the money being spat out once a day. Worse, the automatic spitting has no upper limit. You tested it, right? Why sell it if it was broken? Matthew asked. Fred said, we didn't mean to sell it. We left one in the dormitory and a roommate took it to play with. Somehow it spread. You underestimate human greed, Matthew said, looking at the twins with a mix of annoyance and curiosity. Where is the money that's fed into them stored? He asked. It's stored in the belly of the first frog, George explained. That frog's belly has an undetectable extension charm on it. It doesn't just hold galleons, it also stores the materials to make more frogs. Does the original frog record where the spit-out galleons go? And how many copy frogs can those materials make? Matthew pressed. Fred shook his head. That would be a privacy violation. We didn't put that in. Also, we can't find the first frog now. We did put enough materials in it to make up to 1,000 frogs. Matthew rubbed his temple. The situation was ugly, but not hopeless. Treat it like a 10-galleon novelty frog, he suggested. The materials inside are limited and they can't replicate forever. The reserves in the frog's belly will run out soon. The whole thing will collapse before long. Fred and George looked at each other and, relieved, brightened up. Let's do that, George said. If we tell people it's just an interesting frog toy for 10 galleons, we don't have to worry. Besides, we never collected any money. Fred nodded eagerly. Buying a curious frog for 10 galleons is actually fine. Matthew thought of Draco and his 5,000 galleons. With at most 1,000 copy frogs in circulation, anyone who got in early would lose less. He warned the twins as an investor. Don't leave products like this lying around in future. They need strict testing before anyone else uses them, or you'll create far worse problems. The twins agreed readily. Even pranksters had to listen to a careful investor once in a while. The Quidditch pitch was a roar of color and noise. Today's match was Slytherin versus Ravenclaw. Players from both teams spilled out of the changing rooms and waved to the stands as the crowd answered with a rising tide of cheers. Matthew wasn't supposed to be playing. He was sitting in the stands with his roommates Geralt and Jerry, because Slytherin's starting beater, Perkin McNeil, had recovered from an injury and taken the field. Beside Geralt sat his new girlfriend, Lisa, a fifth-year Ravenclaw. Jerry hooted, Geralt, which team are you supporting? Of course, Geralt began, then glanced at Lisa's bright smile and saved himself. Both teams. We're all from Hogwarts, aren't we? Lisa looked pleased. Jerry shot his fickle friend a look of mock contempt. Lee Jordan from Gryffindor was on commentary duty again. Both teams in position, he called. Slytherin's made another substitution. Matthew Black is off the field. Oh, hang on. Perkin McNeil has recovered from his injury and taken his place as starting beater. Let's see how Slytherin does at full strength. Madam Hooch is in place. The match is about to begin. Madam Hooch tossed the quaffle into the air and blew her silver whistle. Both teams launched into the sky. Ravenclaw's chaser managed to snatch the quaffle first. Lee shouted into his microphone. The quaffle's with Ravenclaw, but Slytherin's chasers are closing in, he cried. Hold up. There's a bludger. It's rocketing at the Ravenclaw chaser. She dodges, but it spoils the Slytherin squeeze. That bludger came from Perkin McNeil, who's just come in for Matthew Black. Is he trying to replicate Black's blitz play? Problem is, Perkin's shot didn't trap the chaser. If anything, it let her slip free. With the Slytherin chasers forced wide, the Ravenclaw chaser burst forward for the hoops. With all players starting around mid-pitch, the first to break clear can often fly to the hoops nearest the opposing keeper for a quick strike. Lee whooped. Quick strike for Ravenclaw. 10 points. Marcus, Slytherin's captain, was livid. He'd been one of the players closing in and was furious to be undone by his own beater. "Perkin," Marcus snapped as they reformed. "Have you rusted over in the hospital wing? Watch your aim. Don't hit every ball you see." Perkin's shoulders slumped. He hadn't meant to ruin the play. After a month off, his timing was thrown. All through his convalescence, he'd heard the endless praise for Matthew Black's skill, and it had eaten at him. Perkin had trained obsessively to prove himself. That overwork had been what landed him in the hospital wing in the first place. He told himself a reserve couldn't outshine someone who trained hard, and all that effort couldn't be wasted. When the next opening presented itself, Perkin lunged. He darted ahead of the Ravenclaw beater, struck a bludger, and sent it barreling toward the Ravenclaw keeper. For a heartbeat, he grinned, but the bludger missed its target and smashed into Marcus just as he was winding up to shoot. Marcus managed to steady his broom before he fell. Otherwise, Perkin would have knocked his captain from the sky. Marcus's face darkened. He caught Madame Hooch's eye and called time. "Substitution," he demanded. "Bring on Black." Matthew, already in his kit among the spectators, rose as one of the stand's cheers swelled. "Black, Black, Black," echoed around the stadium. He waved and guided his broom back to mid-pitch. Lee's voice climbed with excitement. "Timeout over. Matthew Black is back. Can he turn the game around? What will he show us today?" Play resumes. Matthew kicked his broom into a steep climb and shot toward the nearest bludger. He struck it at a Ravenclaw chaser, then felt his broom lurch violently beneath him. The broom surged upward, faster and faster, carrying him into dizzying height. Lee's tone shifted from awe to alarm. "Look, Black's rocketing skyward. Is this a new tactic?" he muttered into the mic. "Oh no, something isn't right. His broom's gone haywire." The broom spun and bucked. In an instant, Matthew's expression tightened. Through his trained senses, he felt the broom erupt in wild, magical flux. There was a sharp, thunderous boom. High above the pitch, the broom exploded. Flames engulfed the tiny figure. Silence fell over the stands like someone had pressed a mute switch. Eyes turned as if in refusal to believe. For heartbeats, the stadium held its breath. Then a single, piercing scream broke through, and the hush detonated into a roar of terror. High above the pitch, Matthew felt the surge of magic, and, without hesitation, leapt off his broom. He activated the two protective artifacts he wore at once. A translucent, polygonal shield snapped into being around him. 4 ice crystal barriers rose between him and the broom. A shield charm wrapped around him as well. In an instant, he had 3 defenses up. The broom exploded in midair. Matthew, too close to it, was hit by the blast and swallowed by a fireball. The heat was searing. The outermost ice shields shattered into molten shards, and the polygonal barrier developed long cracks. The shockwave slammed through the air. Most of it stopped by the shield charm, but the aftershock still slammed Matthew's insides like a hammer. A thin line of blood ran from the corner of his mouth. Weight and force dragged him down. He fell fast. From his pocket, he fumbled out a healing potion and a blood-restoring draught and drank them to staunch the worst of his injuries. On the podium, Professor McGonagall rose to her feet. Professors Snape and Flitwick did the same in the stands, wands already in hand. The crowd's screams choked off into a stunned hush as smoke and flame billowed into the sky. Then, a figure tore through the flames and fell. The professors prepared spells to arrest his descent, but what happened next left them rooted in place. Matthew, falling at high speed and wincing against the pain, thrust his hands toward the ground, fingers splayed. Magic streamed from him into the sand of the Quidditch pitch. The grain ran together, condensed, and the whole sandy surface reshaped itself into a single massive sponge of sand gold, cushioning the fall. The change silenced the stadium. The teachers stood with wands raised, but even they seemed breathless. McGonagall, more than anyone, felt it. This was transfiguration at a level that made her whisper, half to herself, "Remarkable transfiguration. Even I would struggle to do better." They snapped back to action and cast spells to slow his landing. Matthew plunged into the sponge. Even with the cushion and the professor's magic, the impact jarred him painfully. The potions he'd taken kept the damage from getting worse. Dizzy, he slapped his forehead, forced himself alert, and downed another vial from his pocket. The professors hurried onto the pitch. Snape checked him quickly, sniffed the empty bottle Matthew had used, and produced his own vial. "Drink this," he said. Matthew drank without hesitation. Snape's remedies were never to be doubted. Around them, the Quidditch players had dismounted and gathered. Students in the stands surged forward, but the raised sponge kept most of them at bay. Only older students, aided by minor charms, climbed down onto it. McGonagall transfigured a stretcher, helped Matthew onto it, and called out to the stands. The matches ended early. With the current score, Ravenclaw wins. After the regular rotation of matches, there will be an extra game between Slytherin and Ravenclaw. I'm taking Black to the hospital wing. Prefects, escort your houses back to the common rooms. In the hospital wing, Matthew lay on a bed looking far healthier than he felt, his face flushed and unmarked. A knot of his friends hovered nearby. They'd slipped away instead of returning with their houses. The professors had gone off to investigate the cause of the explosion. Seeing his friends' anxious faces warmed him. "I'm fine," he said. "Madame Pomfrey checked me. The injuries were controlled in time, and Professor Snape's potions worked. If I'd been brought in any later, I'd probably be worse off, if not worse than that." Jerry's face was dark. How could this happen? When Harry was playing before, Professor Snape tampered with his broom, Neville blurted. Could it be? Harry clapped a hand over Neville's mouth before he could finish. The Slytherin students nearby were growing hostile. Neville shut up and sank back. Matthew smiled to deflect the tension. "Snape may be strict," he said, "but he wouldn't deliberately harm a student." Hermione was practical. "The professors have gone to investigate. They should have answers soon." "Quiet, this is the hospital wing." Madame Poppy Pomfrey swept over with a steaming cauldron of purple potion, frowning. "Patients need quiet and rest. All of you, go back." After grimacing through a foul-tasting potion, Matthew told them, "You don't need to worry. Really, I feel I could be discharged already." Madame Pomfrey gave him a withering look and took the cauldron away. "Don't be ridiculous. You'll stay here for a few days to recover." "Get some rest," Gerald said. "If anything happens, we'll let you know." Matthew nodded and watched his friends leave the wing, one by one. The last to stay was the younger student he had helped earlier, Griffin Everett. Griffin lingered until the others were gone, then leaned close and murmured into Matthew's ear. After play was halted and the substitution was announced, I saw Will leaving the field by himself. Matthew's eyes sharpened. "Will?" Griffin nodded. "That's all I saw. I don't have proof. Rest, Senior. When I get back, I'll look into it quietly." Matthew patted Griffin's shoulder. "Thank you, Griffin." Griffin smiled shyly. "You've already helped me a lot, Senior. If I can help you in return, I want to." 70. Beginning and End. After everyone had left the hospital wing, Dumbledore and Snape arrived together. Dumbledore asked kindly, "Matthew, feeling any better?" "Professor Dumbledore, I'm fine," Matthew replied. "I should thank Professor Snape," he added. "The potion, it's done wonders." Snape nodded once, expression unreadable, as if it were nothing. Matthew knew better. The potion had been rare and potent. His injuries had mended quickly after drinking it. What he'd told his classmates was no exaggeration. He really could be discharged now. Dumbledore smiled faintly. "I went out to the pitch and saw an impressive feat of transfiguration. Even I couldn't have done something like that at your age." Matthew returned the smile. "When I was falling, something came over me, an instinct. I released the transfiguration. I couldn't have managed such a large-scale change before." Dumbledore considered this. "Crisis often forces growth. It seems you've overcome a serious hurdle, one many never clear. Matthew, you're more remarkable than I believed." "There's still much to learn," Matthew said modestly. "I owe my progress to the professor's guidance." Dumbledore inclined his head and then asked his purpose plainly. "Have you offended anyone recently?" Matthew understood the implication. Dumbledore knew he'd had clashes with some older students, though not lately. He asked, "Do you think this accident was deliberate?" Dumbledore's face grew grave. "We examined the fragments of your broomstick and found a highly unstable magical interference substance inside. That shouldn't be in a broomstick. We questioned the players on the pitch. Beater Perkin McNeil had the strongest motive. Under the professor's questioning, he confessed to his actions." Matthew was surprised the inquiry had moved so fast. Dumbledore went on, "But I believe he withheld information. That's why I wanted to speak with you." Dumbledore rarely used legilimency on students. He preferred judgment shaped by experience. Matthew thought of Thor Griffin's recent hint and offered quietly, "If someone still holds the most grudge against me, it might be Will Crabbe. I've heard whispers that he stirs up older students against me." Dumbledore thought a moment, then said, "We'll handle this properly. For now, you should rest in the hospital wing." Dumbledore and Snape left. Snape had said nothing. Matthew watched the doorway close, a small smile ghosting his lips. He had a sense the outcome might not satisfy him. If this had happened to an ordinary third year, they might have been killed by such an explosion. If the culprit were sent to Azkaban, that would be justice. If the result disappointed him, he would find another way. If they were unwilling to go to Azkaban, he would simply see them off himself. During the match break, in the Slytherin changing room, the players were unusually quiet. They kept replaying, in their minds, the moments when Matthew had taken the field. The thrill of dominating an opponent so completely was intoxicating. Perkin slumped on the long bench, sullen. He hadn't expected to feel so depleted even after time in the hospital wing. Every hit he'd made since had failed to land as he wanted. Captain Marcus entered and announced, "I've made a substitution. Perkin, Matthew will take the field later." Perkin's face went white with shock. He hadn't expected the captain to bench him outright. He'd assumed the break was just to steady himself. "Captain, give me another chance," he begged. "I'll play well in the second half." Marcus shook his head and looked at the rest of the team. "Perkin, understand, I have to be responsible for everyone. I can't let the others' efforts go to waste." Perkin felt humiliated. Other people's efforts mattered, but his didn't. He believed he'd worked hard for this match. Worse, if Matthew came on and turned the game around, Perkin would lose all face. Marcus tried to soothe him, patting his shoulder. "Don't be discouraged. There will be more opportunities." No one in the room spoke for Perkin. He brushed Marcus's hand away, furious and mortified, and stormed out. In the corridor, he almost collided with Will. Perkin only glared, about to leave, but Will grabbed his arm. "Senior, I have something you'll find very interesting." "Let go. I don't need it," Perkin snarled. Will smiled, undeterred, and leaned close to whisper. Perkin's expression shifted from rage to surprise. "Really?" Will led him to a quiet nook and spoke low. "You don't want Matthew coming on and stealing the match, do you? Not when he's a half-blood." Perkin, a pure-blood supremacist, had long resented Matthew's heritage. It was a big part of his grievance. He was tempted but hesitated. "But if I'm caught, I'll be punished." Will waved that aside. "Relax. This will only make his broom harder to control, nothing catastrophic. If they find it, the worst will be detention." Perkin's face twisted with indecision. Will pressed, "There's not much time. Matthew will be in the locker room soon." At that moment, the commentator Lee Jordan announced the Slytherin substitution to the crowd. Cheers erupted. Perkin's expression darkened. He clenched his jaw. "Give it to me," he said. Will grinned and produced a small package from his pocket. "Inject this anti-magic fluid into the broom's power core. Hurry, there's no time." Perkin took the package and hurried to the broom storage. The school's brooms here were much better than those used in flying lessons. Players without personal brooms used these, and once assigned a broom, a player was expected to maintain it, so switches were rare. Perkin located the broom Matthew usually used. Inside the package was a transparent tube of a mercury-like liquid and a tiny needle. He found the power core, inserted the needle, and watched the liquid vanish into the mechanism. When the tube was empty, he sealed the hole with a quick paste that smoothed over instantly. He returned the broom to its bracket and left the storage room. Back in the corner where they'd met, Will waited. Seeing Perkin return, he asked eagerly, "Did it work?" Perkin nodded coldly. I injected it into the power core. I hope it's as effective as you said. Will's smile widened. Good. Now let's go outside and enjoy the show. Perkin and Will stood in a corner, watching the 9 spin wildly out of control in the sky. Perkin looked puzzled. Didn't you say it would only make the 9 hard to control? This looks like more than just hard to control. Will gave a small smile. He had bought that vial of silvery magic resistance liquid from a stall in Nocturne Alley. The dark wizard at the stall had told him it would make it difficult to handle. He'd thought of Matthew immediately. Matthew was a Quidditch player, and Will had always wanted to cause him trouble, so he bought it on the spot. What he didn't tell Perkin was that only a few drops produced the intended effect. Perkin had poured the whole vial in. It was hardly surprising the consequences were so severe. Don't worry, Will said slowly. The effect is just a little stronger than advertised. Regardless, our goal, stopping him from winning, has been achieved. Boom! The 9 exploded in midair, and a fireball swallowed Matthew. Perkin's face went pale, then hot with fury. He grabbed Will by the collar and hissed, "What on earth did you give me?" Perkin's anger wasn't about hurting Matthew so much as the panic that followed. If Matthew were killed, Perkin would be implicated. He was the one who'd put the stuff in. A classmate dead because of him would mean Azkaban. Will, looking suddenly innocent, stammered, I don't know either. The seller said that vial would only make the 9 hard to control. He wasn't about to admit he knew the correct dosage. Then a commotion rose from the stands. Looking up, they saw Matthew burst out of the flames and drop onto the sponge mats. He still had enough strength to cast 28. Perkin let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. If Matthew had died, Perkin really might have ended up in Azkaban. His family had some sway at the ministry. As long as no one died, there might be ways to manage the fallout. But he had to drag Will down with him. There's no covering this up now, Perkin snarled. If I'm found out, I'll be expelled. If you're expelled, don't think you'll get off easy either. Will shot back. Don't forget, you were the one who put that in. Will's tone grew flat. It's already happened. We have to find a way to fix it. If you don't name me, I'll have my father pull some strings, get you placed at Durmstrang Institute in Germany. Will's uncle-in-law was a professor at Durmstrang. Sliding a student who'd made a minor mistake into the school would be easy enough. Perkin thought it over. It might work, but he would need to talk to his family. There could be room to trade favors. Late that night, in the hospital wing ward, the patients slept. A dark shadow crossed the window, and a sleek black cat slipped quietly inside. Matthew opened his eyes and peered under the bed. 2 bright eyes stared back at him, Preserved Egg's body blending into the dimness. He whispered, "Found them?" The bright eyes blinked in what Matthew took for a nod. He picked up his 29, transfigured his pillow to look like himself sleeping, scooped up Preserved Egg, and laid a disillusionment charm over himself. No one would think the boy admitted for recovery would leave the ward in the middle of the night. He wasn't planning anything reckless at Hogwarts, only making preparations in case things got worse. He encountered no one on the way to the Slytherin common room. Once there, he sent Preserved Egg and its clones to shadow Perkin and Will and locate their dormitory rooms. Before curfew, Preserved Egg's replicas tracked them and reported back. Now, late at night, Matthew followed Preserved Egg's directions, carrying the cat's 24. Soon he found one of the clones crouched by a dormitory door. A tap from his 29 unlatched the lock and the door eased open. Inside, several students slept. Matthew found Perkin's bed, extended his right hand, and 20 or 30 runic scripts sprang into his palm. After a few breaths, the runes braided together into a translucent raven. With a flick, the raven spread its wings and flew toward Perkin, merging into him and vanishing. Perkin slept on, unaware. This was the Raven's Eye, 28, a spell to mark and track a target. Matthew repeated the process at Will's dormitory, marking him the same way. With both of them marked, he slipped out and returned to the hospital wing. The whole operation took less than 20 minutes. No one noticed. The next morning, Matthew was roused by a commotion. Madame Pomfrey's voice drifted from the doorway, sharp with reprimand. "This is the hospital wing. You shouldn't be disturbing the injured and the sick." A shocking event occurred during a Hogwarts Quidditch match As an excellent journalist, I have a duty to reveal the truth to the public. A sweet, clipped voice answered. Move aside. You have no right to block a ministry official. We are here to express our concern for the injured student. A high, oily voice. Matthew knew at once. Umbridge. Madame Pomfrey answered wearily. Very well, but be quiet once you're inside. The ward's patients need their rest. 3 people came in. Dolores Umbridge in her ridiculous pink from head to toe, a pink dress, pink wide-brimmed hat, pink handbag, followed by a thin, middle-aged man with a center part and a woman clutching a crocodile skin bag, whose strange, elaborate curls and gaudy, jewel-encrusted spectacles made her look absurdly conspicuous. They approached his bed. Umbridge wore a saccharine, affected smile. I am Dolores Umbridge, Deputy Head of the Office for the Department of Education at the Ministry of Magic. This is Walton McNeil from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and this is Rita Skeeter from the Daily Prophet. We are here to investigate the 9 explosion that occurred during yesterday's Hogwarts Quidditch match. We hope you will cooperate fully. 72. Ministry of Magic Joint Investigation Team. Walton McNeil of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement was Perkins' uncle. Rita Skeeter was a journalist famous for inventing facts and turning small things into scandals. Dolores Umbridge, who had been offended by Matthew during his last trip to Hogsmeade when she oversaw the Office for the Disposal of Dangerous Goods, had since been reassigned and, it seemed, demoted. With that lineup in his sick room, trouble was inevitable. Matthew glanced at Rita Skeeter. She already had her quick scribe quill hovering over parchment. With a mistress of incitement, slander, and distortion present, anything he said was likely to be twisted. Rita noticed his look and smiled. Rest assured, this auto-quill will faithfully record everything asked and answered today, she trilled. I shall write an article from this material to inform the public of the truth. Matthew said flatly, I'm injured and can't get out of bed. I can only receive your interrogation sitting here. The parchment unrolled of its own accord, and the pale yellow quill began to write. The Quidditch match held at Hogwarts presents enormous safety hazards. The unfortunate student Matthew Black was badly hurt when his broom exploded. He has now lost the ability to move about freely. When ministry officials arrived to offer condolences, he expressed strong dissatisfaction, though this resentment is presumably aimed at the derelict Hogwarts authorities. Umbridge ignored Matthew's attitude. Her visit was pure formality. Rita's article would claim Hogwarts was riddled with hidden dangers. In her saccharine voice, Umbridge said, It isn't an interrogation. We've simply come to express our sympathy and to ask you about what happened. She produced a crystal ball. Don't worry about pressure from the school. From this moment on, no images here will be recorded. Matthew sensed she was guarding against him. Was the broom you rode yesterday taken from the school broom storage room? She asked. He nodded. The quill kept writing. Matthew Black remained notably silent while being questioned by ministry officials. Was it pressure from the school? Perhaps someone threatened him? After all, he still has years left at Hogwarts. His compliance would be understandable. Matthew noticed the quill had already filled half a page before he'd said a word. He spoke crisply. According to the professor's investigation, the broom fragments contained a highly unstable magical disruption substance. It was deliberate sabotage. The person who tampered with the broom was Perkin McNeil. The professors have already confirmed it with him. Walton McNeil, silent until now, cleared his throat. On that point, our inquiries show Perkin McNeil only confessed under intense pressure from the teachers. The ministry is still investigating. The Educational Office and the Department of Magical Law Enforcement have formed a joint task force to look into the matter. Matthew was certain, with these people on the case, they'd still be investigating years from now. The auto-quill sprung to life again. According to eyewitness Matthew Black, to protect its reputation, Hogwarts forced a student to shoulder the blame, believing this would let them sleep easy. Will the ministry allow such a thing? The Educational Office and the Department of Magical Law Enforcement have formed a joint task force. The truth will soon be returned to the public. He grew irritated, exactly as he'd feared. Now that the ministry and the McNeils were involved, Perkin might never see Azkaban. Matthew cut Umbridge off. I'm tired. My injuries haven't healed. I need rest. Questioning ends here. Umbridge's voice went high and frothy. How dare you? We're ministry officials investigating this incident. You will answer our questions properly. The quick scribe Quill wrote, Matthew Black has rejected the ministry's help with extreme prejudice. What could have driven him to this? He needn't worry. The ministry will be his staunchest backer. So long as he cooperates, he will be treated fairly. Before the quill could finish, an unseen force smashed it, the parchment shredded into scraps. Moments earlier, Matthew had quietly cast an invisible hand, efficient, silent. The trio had noticed nothing. Destroying the quill and parchment wouldn't stop Rita from penning her distorted story later, but it was enough to rid him of the immediate annoyance. The three stared at the debris for a beat, stunned, then all looked toward Matthew. He kept his expression innocent. Looks like your quick scribe quill and parchment weren't very good quality, he said. Rita snapped. My quill? That was a limited edition Merlin Knight Core collaboration. Matthew shrugged. What a pity. I'd quite have liked one for myself. Rita flushed crimson, but none of them had seen him touch his wand. There was no proof to pin on him. The visitors had no reason to stay now and took their leave. Walton McNeil brought up the rear. As he passed the bed, he leaned in and murmured, If you accept the friendship of the McNeil family, you'll reap rich rewards. Matthew gave him a sideways glance and replied coolly, That depends on the reward, say sending Perkin McNeil to Azkaban? Walton's face darkened. Ungrateful wretch. He flicked his robe and stalked out. Once the tiresome trio had gone, Matthew found himself hoping Dumbledore would show some backbone, at the very least expel the culprit, so Matthew could deal with the boy outside school. 3 days later, Matthew heard from his roommates that Perkin McNeil had dropped out of Hogwarts. Rumor had it he was transferring to Durmstrang Institute in Germany. The ministry investigators seemed unable to find direct evidence tying Perkin McNeil to the incident. Perkin had retracted his confession, saying he'd only admitted it under pressure from the investigators. Under the influence of various parties, the blame shifted toward alleged safety hazards at Hogwarts instead. A fresh article in the Daily Prophet inflamed public opinion, and the headmaster's office was nearly buried in complaint letters. There was talk that the ministry might form a Hogwarts safety inspection group to oversee fixes and improve the teaching environment. Those investigators would never force a confession out of him. They're shameless, Ron fumed. If you ask me, they should have just given Perkin McNeil Veritaserum. Harry had come as well. Tomorrow was Christmas, and they'd come to the hospital wing to visit Matthew and give him his presents. Gerald shook his head. I heard Perkin McNeil was taken away that night. Without solid evidence, the ministry's joint investigation team wouldn't authorize Veritaserum. Jerry sneered. Of course they wouldn't. That so-called joint investigation team was set up to protect Perkin McNeil. The Ministry of Magic was keen to interfere in Hogwarts affairs, and the joint investigation team had grown out of that mix of ambition and influence. Perhaps before long, it would morph into the Hogwarts Safety Inspection Group. Harry scratched his head and looked suddenly faintly anxious about Quidditch. He'd nearly fallen from a great height in his last match, and he didn't have Matthew's exceptional transfiguration skills to save him. If he fell from too high, the consequences could be serious. Harry handed several small parcels to Matthew. Merry Christmas, Matthew. These are from me, and Hermione and Neville asked me to bring theirs too. Hermione and Neville hadn't come because they were going home for the holidays. They'd asked Harry and Ron to deliver their gifts. Ron quickly produced his own present. Merry Christmas. This is from me. Matthew accepted the gifts with a soft smile. Thank you. Merry Christmas. He pulled from his trunk the presents he'd prepared earlier. These are for you, he said, handing them to Harry and Ron, and these are for Hermione and Neville. Please find an owl and send them for me. After taking their gifts, Harry and Ron hurried off. Harry had recently come across an intriguing mirror that let him see his parents, and he'd grown a little obsessed with it. Jerry asked, Aren't you supposed to be discharged today? Matthew nodded. Yes, Madame Pomfrey will bring the last potion soon. I can leave once I've had it. Gerald asked, Where will you spend Christmas? The Hogwarts Express has probably already gone. On Christmas Eve, the Express takes students to King's Cross, but some families travel from Hogsmeade using fireplaces. Parents sometimes meet their children in Hogsmeade and send them through the flue to Diagon Alley. I'm going to my aunt's, Matthew said. We agreed on it over the summer. Her home is in London, so I'll use the fireplace in Hogsmeade to get to Diagon Alley first. Jerry brightened. I thought you'd stay and spend Christmas with us. Jerry's parents were abroad, so he had to stay at Hogwarts. Geralt was staying too. He wanted to spend Christmas with his new girlfriend. The roommates left after exchanging gifts. Merry Christmas, dear. Drink this, and you'll be able to leave, Madame Pomfrey said kindly as she appeared with a steaming pot of potion. Matthew took it. Merry Christmas, Madame Pomfrey. Thank you for looking after me. After he finished the potion, Dumbledore arrived. He looked warier than usual. The flood of complaint letters and the ministry's interference had placed a great strain on him. He saw Matthew buttoning his coat and asked, Matthew, are you leaving the hospital wing? Matthew nodded. I'm fully recovered. I'm heading to my aunt's for Christmas now. Dumbledore smiled. Spending Christmas with family is a good thing. The Hogwarts Express has already left, but there's a flue hearth in the headmaster's office. I can send you through to Diagon Alley. Thank you, Professor. Matthew didn't refuse. He had expected Dumbledore to have more to say. He had approached Matthew quite deliberately. They walked and talked. Matthew, I must apologize, Dumbledore said. I failed to keep a promise. We found no evidence that Perkin McNeil tampered with the broomsticks. The night he was taken by ministry personnel, he retracted his admission. We cannot use veritaserum or legilimency on an underage wizard without proper authorization. Without evidence, we cannot charge him. He's transferred to Durmstrang. What happened does reveal weaknesses in Hogwarts' management, and we will inspect the broomsticks before every match from now on. I promise you, such an accident will not happen again in a Hogwarts Quidditch match. Matthew heard confirmation of what he'd already suspected. Perkin McNeil would not be sent to Azkaban. He hadn't been charged and would continue his education elsewhere. Professor, are you just going to let them have their way? Matthew asked. Surely you can stop them. I believe you have that power. Dumbledore's voice dropped. At the moment, the measures they're using are legal and defensible. Breaking the rules ourselves could lead to worse consequences. It is not only our powers that define us, Matthew, but the choices we make. I understand, Professor, Matthew said and fell silent. He could not ask Dumbledore to break the rules for him. When they reached the headmaster's office, Dumbledore produced a small notebook. Merry Christmas, Matthew. These are some of my notes on transfiguration. They should be useful. Thank you, Professor. Matthew was pleasantly surprised. Dumbledore had never given him a gift before. He hadn't brought anything for Dumbledore, so he could only fish a small box of Muggle sweets from his pocket. Merry Christmas, Professor. These are Muggle sweets I bought. I hope you'll like them. Muggle sweets? Dumbledore's eyes twinkled. I shall certainly try them. Matthew apparated from the headmaster's office fireplace straight into the leaky cauldron. Hey, Black, Merry Christmas! Old Tom called, wiping a glass behind the bar. He waved when he saw Matthew. Merry Christmas, Tom, Matthew replied with a smile. Old Tom scanned him up and down. Are you healed? I read about it in the paper. Everyone in the pub's been talking these last few days. Matthew nodded. I'm fine now. Thanks to Professor Snape and Madame Pomfrey, my injuries healed quickly. Old Tom leaned in conspiratorially. I must say, what the Daily Prophet printed is slander. He lowered his voice. I noticed the author was Rita Skeeter. Her writings got, at most, 5% credibility. Matthew agreed. Indeed, the professors didn't oppress or threaten Perkin McNeil. Rita Skeeter interviewed me, and her article doesn't match what I said at all. Old Tom shrugged. Looks like Dumbledore's got trouble ahead. Want a drink? Matthew shook his head. Not now. I need to hurry home. It's Christmas Eve. He didn't go straight to his aunt's. He had a different Christmas present to deliver first. Tomorrow was Christmas. Presents couldn't be late. Finding a quiet alley, he tuned into the direction of the Raven's Eye mark and picked a travel umbrella from his bag. Making those travel umbrellas was simple once you knew the spell, but, like the extension charm, unregistered ones were illegal. In Matthew's unregistered collection, there happened to be a number of such forbidden umbrellas. He'd created them in corners of Europe for emergencies. He chose one patterned with a blue field and a red and white Union Jack so he wouldn't confuse it with the others. He activated the umbrella, space folded, and he vanished. He landed on Britain's easternmost coast. After steadying himself from the jolt, he checked the Raven's eye mark again. When the mark's target was distant, he couldn't lock on a precise spot, only a general direction, so he had to keep moving from one umbrella to the next to hone in. "Gone out to sea? They're fairly quick," he murmured, watching the wide expanse of ocean. He selected another umbrella, this one red, white, and blue striped, and went again. After several successive jumps, he arrived on an island in the Heligoland Bight. He was very close now. He could sense the Raven's eye mark's exact location. Dark clouds gathered over the sea. A storm was building, ideal weather for delivering his kind of gift. Out on the Heligoland waters sailed a ship invisible to muggles. It looked like a large wooden galleon from the Age of Discovery, but not a single sailor moved on deck. It was clearly a wizarding craft. In the cabin, two people were dining, Perkin McNeil and his father, Argus McNeil. Argus was all rigid posture, slick hair, and a thick handlebar mustache. He was cutting a piece of steak with calm precision. "Perkin," he said, "I hope that after you go to Durmstrang, you won't give me any more trouble." "I understand, father," Perkin replied sullenly. Leaving Hogwarts in disgrace had left him resentful. Argus cut another bite and chewed slowly. "You don't seem to understand where you went wrong this time." Perkin looked blank. Argus's voice sharpened. "You act too crudely. I'm worried about you. Before you act, think about the consequences, when you can do something and when you can't. Take this case, for example. Did you consider that if something went wrong, you'd be the first suspect? Remember, when you want to get rid of someone, you must hide yourself first. Fortunately, you weren't stupid enough to leave any evidence." Perkin's chin dropped. "I understand, father." Argus glanced at the dark sky. "A storm's coming, but we should reach Germany before it hits." A third voice suddenly spoke from the doorway. "Gentlemen, I hope I haven't interrupted your meal." Both father and son started. Argus reacted like a man trained in quick reflexes and went for the wand at his waist, but found his hands held fast by an invisible force. Black! Perkin's face went white. "Father, I can't move." "Where's Carl?" Argus barked. Carl was the McNeil family's house elf. He was supposed to be standing by with the meal. Argus's face twisted with regret. Why hadn't he kept Carl in the dining room? A house elf's body toppled onto the floor behind them. The man who had spoken stepped forward. It was Matthew. He had tracked the ship and sensed 3 magical signatures aboard. He had gone to the kitchen first to deal with the house elf, then cloaked himself with a disillusionment charm before slipping into the dining room. He had listened for a few moments before revealing himself. Even in the cold, Argus's forehead was slick with sweat. He forced a calm smile. "Mr. Black, there must be some misunderstanding. Please, speak freely. If there's anything you need, the McNeil family will provide." Matthew smiled faintly. "Mr. McNeil, you are taking this far too seriously. There is a misunderstanding between Perkin and me, but I think it's easy to settle." Argus exhaled in relief. If the man had a demand, they could pay or call an Auror once ashore. "Please tell me. Although the McNeil family isn't as old as the Black family, we have plenty of resources. I'm sure we can satisfy you." Matthew's voice was gentle. "My request is simple. Carl was a loyal house elf. I'm afraid he'd be lonely on the road, so I hope he has some company." Perkin, Neil, and his son felt as if they had fallen into an ice cellar when Matthew spoke. A cold dread rose from their hearts, ran up their spines, and made them tremble all over. Perkin pleaded, face contorted. "Black, please, let me go. I didn't know. I really didn't know that vial would make the flying broomstick explode. I thought, at worst, it would make you fall and bedridden for a while." Then he seemed to remember and screamed, "It was Will Crabbe. He gave me that vial. You should go after him. I didn't mean to. I didn't want to kill you." Matthew's eyes flashed blue. Calmly, he replied, "You still did it. If he hadn't been able to avert the crisis the other day, he would have been the one dead." As for Will Crabbe, Matthew would find him, but not right now. Matthew plucked the information he needed from Perkin's memory with little effort. He glanced at the sky. Thunder was beginning to gather. After stripping the McNeils of the magical items they carried, He summoned the invisible hand and used it to haul them out of the cabin and up onto the deck. "Perkin, I've prepared a suitable Christmas gift," he said. "I hope you like it." He cast a wind and rain-proofing charm on himself, then threw up a mage armor to guard against stray effects. On the deck, the father and son watched in horror as an unseen force carried Matthew away from the ship and into the darkening sky. Perkin's begging fell away. He shouted instead, resentful and furious, "Black, I curse you! You'll die a horrible death! I'll be waiting for you in hell!" The younger McNeil had already lost whatever composure he had left. He stood silent, eyes vacant. Matthew intended the storm to make everything look like an accident. Someone might suspect, perhaps, but if most people were fooled, that would be enough. He'd learned that in the past few days. He spread his hands, wand in his right, and took on the air of a conductor. The clouds over the sea thickened and sank low, lightning stuttering inside them, thunder muttering in the distance. The wind rose, the sails strained and flapped, and the ship shuddered under lashing waves. With the wand as baton, the storm answered him. Each graceful movement seemed to pluck a thread of thunder from the sky and stitch it into a pattern of light and sound. With every sweep of his hand, the heavens grew more volatile, lightning flared, and the sea's rage edged toward fury. Then, when the orchestration reached its peak, he sent it all down toward the ship. "Merry Christmas, McNeil." Matthew was using the only second-tier spell he knew well, Great Lightning Summoning. It called down bolts from the sky. In a thunderstorm, its strength and number could increase dramatically. Used now under the charged clouds, its power was devastating. The alchemical sailing ship that belonged to Perkin McNeil and his son was shattered by the lightning. Matthew drew down. The spell's area of effect was large and clumsy. Even after Matthew had flown a safe distance, he nearly took a strike himself. When it was done, the McNeil's boat was nothing but a ruined, splintered shape on the waves. He pocketed a Union Jack umbrella and teleported away to a quiet London neighborhood. Not far from his landing spot stood a 2-story red brick house, his aunt and uncle's home. He had no intention of hunting down Will Crabbe right away. Killing him now would be too conspicuous. He would wait until the heat died down. As long as Crabbe remained on Earth, he could be found. Matthew rang the bell. A moment later, a woman in a floral dress opened the door. His aunt, Diana Harker. She stepped forward, hugged him, and peered at his face. "Merry Christmas, Matthew. You're back," she said. "You've lost weight, but you seem taller." She led him inside. "Dinner will be ready soon," she said. "Do you need any help?" "No, thank you," Diana waved him off. "Just the grilled fish left. Go see your uncle. He's in the study. Call him down in 10 minutes. The house was warm and festive. A Christmas tree in the corner glowed with lights, stockings and presents hung from its branches, and ribbons and bells were strung around the walls. Matthew climbed to the second floor and knocked on the study door. "Uncle, may I come in?" Paul Harker opened the door. He had a receding hairline and a tired smile. "Matthew, you're back! Merry Christmas!" He stepped forward and embraced him. His study was cluttered with files, and a red filing cabinet stood against the wall. Paul had been promoted to cabinet minister and was perpetually busy. "Still working on Christmas Eve?" Matthew asked. Paul gave a strained laugh. "There's always something. Papers to sign, letters to answer. It never ends." Matthew reached into his pocket and produced a quick scribe quill he'd bought at Scribulus. "Uncle, this is your Christmas present. A quick scribe quill should help cut down your workload a bit." 76. Gift Paul took the quill in surprise. Its shaft was a slender, snow-white feather. The nib and core gleamed with an antique dark gold luster. "Oh, is it a magic item? What does it do?" he asked. Matthew explained, "It's a quick scribe quill. When you write with it, it automatically transcribes the words in your head and polishes them as it goes. It saves a lot of time on paperwork. You can also train its writing style, so the handwriting won't look odd to others." "That's fantastic." Paul couldn't wait. He grabbed a sheet of paper and started writing. The quill flowed easily. A whole page appeared with almost no effort. He was like a child with a new toy, scribbling away, turning page after page. Suddenly he remembered something and asked nervously, "Matthew, does it need special ink? Like magic ink?" "Ordinary ink is fine," Matthew said. "It soaks up a lot, enough to last a whole day." "This is magic." Paul said admiringly. "I love this Christmas gift. I'll use it carefully, only at home, of course." The Harks were already familiar with the Wizarding World's statute of secrecy. Professor McGonagall had come by to explain it after Matthew's admission to Hogwarts. From downstairs, Diana called, "You two, come down and eat." Christmas songs filled the dining room, making it warm and cozy. At the center of the table sat a classic holiday roast turkey, golden brown and tempting, but disappointingly dry. The other main dish was roasted cod, carefully marinated, brushed with herbs and olive oil, seasoned and baked until the skin was crisp. The cod remained tender inside and tasted much better. The rest of the spread was familiar comfort food: vegetable salad, mashed potatoes, crispy French fries, and roasted sausages. Diana glanced up with a disapproving smile. "We're trying to eat, and you're still writing? Is retro style popular in Whitehall now? Why are you using a quill?" Paul continued writing at the table, barely looking up. "It's not an ordinary quill, it's magical," he said. Diana turned to Matthew. "A magic quill?" "Yes," Matthew said. "That was my Christmas present to Uncle Paul. It should help him with some of his workload." Matthew produced another gift and handed it to Diana. "This is for you. It's a bestseller from Madame Pimpernel's beauty potion shop, an enhancement potion. It helps with complexion and general skin condition." Diana's face lit up. Women always appreciate beauty products. "Thank you, Matthew. We got you something, too." Their present to Matthew was a thick prototype laptop, an unreleased engineering model rumored to hit the market later in the year. It was bulky, about 3.5 kilograms, with a distinctive little red track point in the center of the keyboard. Matthew recognized at once that it would be a landmark product and likely a collector's item in the future. Diana's gift was a hardcover photo album of pictures she'd taken, family photos, snapshots of Matthew as a child, and some beautiful landscapes. "Thank you. I really like them," Matthew said. Diana cut 2 turkey drumsticks and placed them on Matthew's plate. "You need to eat more. You've lost weight again." After dinner, Matthew went through the gifts he'd exchanged. He'd already mailed most of his presents while at Hogwarts using the school's owls. Professor Snape had received a set of precision instruments commonly used in Muggle laboratories with an instruction manual. Professor McGonagall had gotten a miniature macro scene model of the Quidditch pitch that Matthew had transfigured, complete with tiny figures in the 4 house uniforms. Professor Flitwick had a wand maintenance kit. Professor Sprout had been sent some rare seeds, and in return, most of the professors had sent him books, while Sprout had gifted him an ornamental plant she'd grown herself. To Matthew's surprise, Draco Malfoy had sent a box of money frog wallets, 7 or 8 of them. Draco's letter complained about Perkin McNeil, claiming that if it hadn't been for McNeil, Slytherin wouldn't have lost to Ravenclaw. He also crowed that his financial project would soon turn a profit and that next year he would fund new Nimbus broomsticks for the Slytherin team. He planned to join and hoped to play alongside Matthew. Matthew smiled faintly at Draco's team spirit, but wondered how old Malfoy would react if Draco's venture failed. He remembered seeing Draco's parcel that morning. By evening, the frog wallets hadn't produced a single galleon. Draco's heavily invested financial project was probably collapsing today. His Christmas might not be a cheerful one. Luna had sent one of her handmade cork necklaces. Matthew had given her a beaded bracelet whose beads came from trees in the winter forest, effectively a charm from another world. When he finished tallying everything, Matthew took out the book of Transfiguration insights that Dumbledore had given him. Matthew had always been well-rounded. Besides alchemy and magical creatures and plants, he'd kept up with most subjects. Transfiguration, though, had recently become prominent for him. When he transfigured the Quidditch pitch that day, he'd broken through a restriction and reached a new level. Transfiguration was now his strongest subject. The breakthrough had brought a realization. To become a top wizard, you had to cultivate the fields where you had an advantage. All great wizards had their specialties. Voldemort with his killing curse, Dumbledore with his transfiguration. From now on, Matthew planned to focus primarily on transfiguration while he was in the Hogwarts world. 77. White Armworm, the Winter Forest, Wizarding World. The exploration team had found a promising site, an area not claimed by any powerful magical creature clan. The team leader's face brightened with relief. After more than 10 days in the forest, they had finally come across a place suitable for establishing an outpost. The team leader unfolded a map, marked the spot, and addressed the members. What we need to do first is drive the creatures out of this area and then set up a protective array. Form teams of 3, 8 groups in total. 5 groups will handle the expulsion, 2 groups will set up the array, and 1 group will stay behind to set up camp and prepare supper. Grouping was left to preference among those of the same affinity, and tasks were assigned by lot. Matthew naturally teamed up with Link and Anna, and their draw tasked them with setting up one of the arrays. The leader produced a set of array components from the pack of a 2-legged pack beast and explained the procedure to the 2 groups assigned to the job. Setting this array up is simple, he said. Bury the warding stakes at the 8 cardinal and intercardinal points, then place this keystone in the center. Once the keystone is activated, the array will be complete. Don't activate it yet after placing the keystone. Wait until we leave. I only brought 2 access talismans. The arrays came with matching access talismans. Only those bearing a talisman could pass through and come and go freely. The other team assigned to setup was also composed of court wizards, the squad led by that tall court wizard everyone knew. Link was acquainted with her. They agreed to each set up one half of the array. Matthew and the others headed to the edge of the growth area. The warding stakes they'd been given arrived as components that had to be assembled. Assembly was straightforward. In 10 minutes, they'd put together one stake, a long rod over 2 meters tall and as thick as a thigh. They buried each stake in the soil so that half remained above ground. Matthew poked at the packed earth and asked, curious, how much attack can this array hold up against? Link tamped the soil down and explained, in extreme cases, it can withstand attacks up to the level of a formal wizard. It depends on how many magic stones you place in the keystone to power it. But if you use it to actively defend against an assault, the power consumption is huge. He added, this kind of warding array also has a concealment effect. We're installing it mainly to hide this site and keep nearby creature clans from detecting it. Magical creatures don't sense as well as wizards do. This array is enough to fool most of the clans around here. How much would one of these cost? Matthew kept asking, intrigued by the wards. Link rubbed his chin, thinking, probably tens of thousands of gold coins. Medium-sized warding arrays like this rarely appear on the open market. What you see are usually small arrays. If you want a medium or larger array, you typically have to commission one. A small array that in rare cases can withstand a formal wizard's attack is usually around 10,000 gold. After finishing the first stake, Matthew and the others installed the remaining 3 on their side the same way. The whole process took under an hour. The keystone in the center also had to be assembled. With cooperation from both groups, the central unit went together quickly. A platform holding a blue crystal sphere was poised in the center of the area. Once Matthew and the others had finished their half of the warding network, they returned to camp. Not long after, the teams that had been driving out creatures also filed back. The exploration team had completed the task of securing a patch of the growth area for their outpost. Spirits were high. Logistics wizard Al prepared a hearty celebratory meal. They would push deeper into the winter forest the next day, heading toward the inner regions to help Lilith and Vivian search for the shadow white deer. Matthew woke again inside the gray mist world. In the center of the camp, a bonfire burned with a gray-white light. Beyond the circle of that light lay only an endless, pallid mist. He remembered the campsite had been next to one of the stakes they'd installed. Curious, he rose and went to the camp's edge, and there, half buried in the sand, was the stake. Could I take it? He thought. He tried to pull it up, but it crumbled in his hands into a handful of fine sand. Matthew frowned at the powder slipping through his fingers. This world is strange, he muttered. He returned to the bonfire bowl. In reality, the fire basin was also a warding relic. He tested it, but it, too, collapsed into dust in his grip. The gray-white flame guttered out and the pallid mist at the camp's border flowed in, swallowing the circle of light. In moments, the whole camp was shrouded. With theft impossible, Matthew had no choice but to explore outward. The mist greatly limited magical sensing. He could hardly rely on any detect spells and had to observe mostly with his own eyes. Strangely, though there was no clear light source and everything was buried in mist, the world didn't look dim. The mist itself seemed to glow faintly, as if it were the light. The terrain underfoot resembled a desert, golden sands stretching on. His footprints left clear impressions. He walked for a while, then noticed the sand felt softer beneath his steps. Glancing down, he thought he sensed something under the surface. He used invisible hand to lift himself up, just as a deathly pale arm thrust out of the sand, clamping down toward his right foot. A shield of semi-transparent polygons snapped into place between his foot and the thing. From its exposed features, Matthew could make out exactly what it was, a worm that entirely resembled a human arm. In the palm sat a mouthplate lined with hideous, jagged fangs. The rest of the creature was like an unnaturally pale arm. The white armworm bit at his magical shield with that tooth-filled palm. When Invisible Hand withdrew, the creature collapsed back onto the sand. It didn't have the ability to fly. It writhed forward across the ground, its movements resembling a pale arm waving as it crawled toward him. 78,000 hands. Matthew Black flicked his wand, and a transparent, arc-shaped wind blade swept across the sprawling white armworms on the ground, slicing them in two. Before he could check the results, the sand beneath his feet began to tremble. Pale arms, countless, writhing, poked up from the dunes. The sight reminded him, absurdly, of the River of Oblivion from Eastern myth. For a moment he felt like he stood on the bridge of helplessness, watching a tide of lonely hands reaching toward him. The sensation made his skin crawl. The swarm changed again. The pale arms aggregated, braided, and climbed over one another until they twisted into a towering tree made entirely of limbs. There were simply too many white armworms. Though Matthew had cut down dozens with spells, new arms flowed in and filled the trunk. The tree lashed out at him. Matthew summoned the invisible hand and dodged to the right, but the arm tree was unnervingly quick. Mid-air it shifted course and lashed to where he had moved. The invisible hand couldn't put enough distance between them. Matthew snatched a transfiguration material from his supply pouch and turned it into a giant eagle. He vaulted onto the bird's broad back, shaped a saddle-like ridge on its spine so he wouldn't be thrown, then cast spells to reduce weight and increase speed. The eagle spread its wings and rose, quickly pulling away from the living tree. This scale of transfiguration was new to him. Previously, he could only make ordinary-sized birds. Scaling a bird up to carry a person had always created problems. It took more than brute enlargement. Wing structure and aerodynamics had to be adjusted precisely. He had only recently figured that out. Matthew eased the eagle to a slow glide and led the arm tree on a loping chase, weaving back and forth. After a few tight turns, the tree's trunk began to knot and twist in on itself. When the trunk could no longer stretch, countless white arms began to spill off and scatter, then reassemble. "Agile," he muttered. He swept his wand toward the sand and poured a surge of arcane energy into the ground. The dunes melted and changed. The effort to turn sand into a sea of fire cost more than he'd expected. Since his transfiguration had advanced, he could do much more, but it still drained him. He swallowed a few potions, caught his breath, then pushed his wand forward. The sea of fire surged up, forming a massive serpent of flame that lunged outward and swallowed the rejoined white arms. The arms writhed within the blaze. Charred hands rained down like a meteor shower, falling to the dunes and carbonizing into ash. Matthew's expression tightened. The white armworms were weak to fire, and anything burned to ash would no longer hold essence. He wouldn't be able to touch them and let the red crystal in his mind absorb their energy. He reverted the fire back into sand, but having already pushed himself hard with the transfiguration and relying on potions that weren't restoring his reserves fast enough, the flames were slow to die. It took time before the blaze fully extinguished, leaving the ground scattered with carbonized limbs and ash. Matthew stepped forward and touched the blackened remains. Red light flared up and was drawn into the red crystal embedded in his mind. The pieces that had burned to dust held nothing. Their essence had dissipated. Still, he had a rich harvest. The red energy each white armworm contained was comparable to what he'd taken from the hornstone beetles before, and this time He'd absorbed the energy of several hundred of them. The red crystal seemed voracious, its interior compressed to accept more, continuously drawing in the light. Matthew had half wondered if the crystal would change once full, but it behaved like an endless sail, always filling and stopping short at 99.9%. After a short walk through the mist, he saw the antlered girl again, her silvery white ghostlight shimmering. She raised her right hand slowly, fingers pressed, and pointed with one finger toward a direction. Matthew activated the red crystal and let the world stretch around him. He fought the nausea of traversal and focused on the way she pointed. In that instant, elevated, viewing from above, he saw once more that massive shadow lurking out in the gray haze. He woke with a start by the campfire. The choking, drowning sensation receded as he took a few deep breaths. The sky was beginning to pale. Dawn was close. He'd noticed before that time in the mist world ran almost in step with time in the wizarding world, unlike his crossings into the Hogwarts world. He took the pocket watch from his pocket and checked it against the one he'd left on the ground before drifting off. The times matched nearly perfectly. There was a deeper tie between the mist world and the wizarding world than between the Hogwarts world and the wizarding world. Only one wizard remained on watch by the fire. The other was over by the two-legged pack beast, idly doing something with its harness. Matthew rose and walked toward the fire with slow steps. The wizard on watch belonged to the trade association, somebody Matthew didn't know well. Hearing footsteps behind him, the man turned and smiled. "I've been up all night," the watchman said. "I'm a bit hungry, so I'm digging around for some dried meat." At the edge of that smile, a blue light flashed in Matthew's eyes, then vanished the instant the man looked directly at him. The night watch wizard blinked, puzzled. He'd only thought he'd seen that flash and blamed it on exhaustion. He pulled a strip of dried meat from his pack and offered it. "Want a piece?" Matthew smiled and shook his head. "It's nearly dawn. Al will be up soon to make breakfast." The wizard nodded and walked toward the central fire with the meat. Matthew watched his back go, feeling oddly blank. In that instant of eye contact, in the split second the blue light had gone, Matthew realized the man had been lying. 79. Author's note on launch. It came out of nowhere. Yesterday, my editor suddenly told me the book was going live. I thought we wouldn't hit the shelves until 200,000 words. The Winter Forest arc I'm writing now is the true start of the Wizarding World's main storyline. I'd planned to lay more groundwork first, but with the early release, I'll tighten the pacing and reveal Winter Forest's secrets over the next few days. The HP world has several major plot lines, and the Merlin thread is tightly bound to the Wizarding World. Thank you, mighty readers, for your support all along, and thank you, dear editor, for the contract. Only after I began writing did I realize how tough web fiction is. It's now filling almost every scrap of my free time. Every monthly ticket, every bookmark, every read, every kind comment, every recommendation vote, every click gives me a boost. It's what keeps me going. Finally, please give me those all-important first-day subscriptions. 80. New coordinates. Please subscribe. The core of the Winter Forest was nothing like the canyon on the outskirts. Massive trees, each wide enough for several people to embrace, rose all around. The danger here was far greater than at the rim. Hostile life forms were more numerous and more dangerous. A few days of searching left everyone exhausted. Matthew Black, however, had kept his spirits reasonably high by returning to the Hogwarts world periodically to rest. Since they entered the forest core, the huge shadow that appeared in Matthew's dreams whenever he entered the mist world had seemed to draw closer. When he dreamed in this area, that enormous silhouette could be seen in the gray fog that pooled at the ground. Matthew had a growing certainty. If he entered a dream somewhere inside this core, he would be able to find the location of that great shadow. Link periodically released a bloodline tracking spell to sense old Watson's location. Without a specific lead on the shadow white deer, they followed Link's suggestion and searched in the direction of old Watson. Eventually, they found his camp. A visual concealment spell still cloaked the site. From the outside, it appeared empty. Inside, the scene was chaotic, as if a fierce battle had taken place. Even the campfire at the center was warded. Thanks to that enchantment, the snow hadn't settled over the camp. Link frowned. Nobody was in the tents. The bloodline tracking had pointed directly at this camp. "Link, there's blood here," Matthew called. Link crouched by the campfire and used a bloodline confirmation charm. "This is my grandfather's blood." He followed the spatters and found bloodstains in several places. Eventually, he came to a giant tree and saw dried blood on its trunk, as if something had bled from within it. Link drew his long sword, cut through the bark, and found a body hidden inside. "Grandfather!" he cried. It was old Watson. Link dug the corpse free, his face a mask of grief. He had been raised by his grandfather and loved him deeply. The corpse bore a penetrating wound that ran from the back through to the chest. Link's voice went low. "Someone killed grandfather." They searched the area thoroughly but found no sign of other people. Old Watson had once been a formal wizard, though a near-fatal injury had later eroded his foundations and reduced his rank. Before he left the royal capital, he had left behind what wealth he could, including a warded storage chest. Storage wards were exorbitantly expensive in this world. Most apprentice wizards didn't own them. Link had brought that chest with him and placed his grandfather's corpse inside, intending to withdraw it later for burial. With nothing else of value discovered, he said to Matthew and Anna, "Let's go. They've been waiting a long time." The rest of Link's team took a quick look around the camp and then rejoined the others. The wizards continued their search for the shadow-white deer. The team leader, noticing everyone's fatigue, steered his landstrider bird toward Lilith and advised, "Miss Lilith, many in the group are exhausted. They can't stay here indefinitely. You should make a plan." Lilith tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and thought a moment. "Search 2 more days. Tonight we set up camp early to rest. Tomorrow we'll use the secret potion that attracts magical creatures to try to draw out the shadow-white deer. If it doesn't come, or if we attract a creature we can't handle, we'll withdraw from the winter forest." The team leader nodded. "I'll tell everyone when we make camp." A sudden, eerie laughter came from the trees. "Heh." The sound crawled under everyone's skin. The leader shouted, "Alert!" A disheveled woman emerged from the forest. Her hair was dry and tangled. Scabs and raw wounds peppered her scalp. She wore a tattered robe and her exposed hands were scarred. She picked at the wounds with the only intact fingernail on her right hand. She didn't look like a normal civilian. The leader warned, "Stop! Don't come any closer or we'll attack." The woman paid no heed and continued forward. Matthew detected raw, violent magical fluctuations about her. This was a witch, but unlike any normal wizard, her magic was wild and discordant. "You stay, feed my darlings," she rasped. Matthew felt something forming around them. The leader sensed it too and barked, "We're surrounded! Attack!" Over 20 spells flew toward the witch. The wizards had already been prepared. The first volley tore her apart, but the forest rustled and a swarm of insects poured forth. The creatures were fist-sized, with oval bodies, 8 spider-like legs, hard chitinous shells, and compound eyes that glowed dark red. Some of the insects clustered and merged, rebuilding the witch's upper body from the swarm. Her lower half was a writhing mass of insects. "Hey, darlings, eat, quickly." Before she could finish, several fireballs struck and tore her to pieces again. The upper torso reformed instantly, however, and she emitted a shrill scream that sent an invisible sonic wave at the wizards. Link gritted his teeth and grabbed the necklace at his throat. "Gather to me," he shouted. When he activated the protective pendant, a translucent shield wrapped him and those beside him. The sound wave slapped the barrier and was scattered. Subsequent waves were likewise blocked. Most of the other wizards managed to defend against the attack, but a few failed. Those who didn't protect themselves felt as if sharp cones had been driven into their ears. Blood streamed from their ears and their faces drained. Lilith held her hands flat. A tome-like grimoire rose before her and began to flip pages at a furious speed. She channeled a vast spell, a fiery sphere the size of several meters condensed in the air, radiating a terrible heat. Moisture in the air vaporized, snow on the trees and ground melted, and the temperature shot up. It cost Lilith dearly. Her complexion paled, but the sphere detonated in a meteor-like rain of fire. The sky seemed full of falling flames that smashed into the insect swarm, igniting them. The air filled with the smell of roasting meat. The insects, however, reformed into an enormous sphere. The outer layer burned, but the inner mass kept filling in the gaps. The burning orb rolled toward the wizards, shedding charred insects as it went. Matthew produced a bright bolt of lightning from his palm and struck a cluster of the insect spheres. The outer layer of insects charred instantly. The lightning paralyzed inner insects. Countless creatures collapsed. The spherical mass disintegrated. The paralyzed insects were consumed by ground flames. The witch's screams echoed from within the burning mass. As living insects diminished, her voice weakened. "Well done," Lilith said, though the spell had taken too much of her and didn't achieve complete destruction alone. Matthew's lightning had been decisive. With combined effort, the wizards annihilated the swarm before it reached them. Exhausted, they found a nearby clearing and set up camp to rest. Matthew woke from the mist world again. This time, as soon as he opened his eyes, he noticed something unusual. The small sigil in his mind glowed faintly. He had never experienced that before in the gray fog world. He drew his arcane device and scanned his surroundings. In the center of the campfire burned a gray-white light. The gray fog still lay outside the perimeter, and at first glance, nothing seemed different. He left camp and walked into the fog. The landscape there resembled the core of the winter forest, towering ancient trees and hulks of trunks that would take many people to embrace. Ahead, the huge shadow he'd seen in dreams floated indistinctly. This was the place the antlered girl had pointed him to. He had tried before to walk toward it in the mist world, but the path had seemed endless. As he went deeper into the fog, the mind sigil's glow intensified. A moment later, he saw a light hidden in the gray mist. Moving forward, he came to a camp that felt familiar. Back to the camp? He wondered. But it wasn't the camp he'd just left. It was the very camp where they had found old Watson. Unlike in the waking world, the campfire here burned with a gray-white light, and someone sat before it. The figure had their back to Matthew, silhouetted by the fire. When the person slowly rose and turned, Matthew saw that they were entirely pitch black, as if made of shadow. Link would have noticed the outline matched his grandfather's exactly. The pitch-black figure raised its right hand. Matthew reacted instantly and leapt aside. A jet of black light slammed into the spot where he'd been standing, disintegrating the ground. Matthew raised his mage armor and pointed his arcane device at the earth. The ground rolled like waves, and the shadow figure could not keep its balance on the trembling surface. Then a burning hand manifested, seized the shadow, and the flames swallowed it. The pitch-black figure writhed, but made no sound, and soon it stopped moving. Matthew stepped forward to inspect. The shadow had flattened into a thin film, like a layer of shade. He poked it with his invisible hand and felt the presence of a damaged blue crystal inside the form. The crystal suddenly flared, and the blue light shot to the sigil in Matthew's mind. The energy inside the sigil surged toward the broken crystal. When the light faded, the damaged shard had been restored to perfect form. Matthew stared. The mind sigil had transmitted a piece of information into his consciousness, a set of coordinates. And they were coordinates in the mist world. The sigil's glow intensified until Matthew felt a sudden lightness surge through him. In an instant, the camp and the shadow figure vanished. When he came to his senses, Matthew stood before a tower-like structure that rose into the sky. Only the lower portion of the immense tower was visible. Above it, the structure disappeared into gray fog, and a black mass lingered higher up. This was the huge tower he had seen in his dreams. He climbed the stone steps. The whole building seemed to respond, trembling faintly. Unknown visitor, core hub detected, judging weight, obtaining permission. A disjointed voice intoned. It then smoothed out. Wizard Tower permission change. Holder change successful. You have become the new owner of the Wizard Tower. Matthew's heart slammed. A Wizard Tower, and he had become its owner? Who are you? He asked. Respected Master, Zero, the artificial tower spirit, is at your service, the voice replied. Matthew caught the keyword. Zero? He had never seen the wizard towers of this world and didn't know if every tower had an artificial spirit. From his experience in 2 lives, an artificial tower spirit was the magical equivalent of an artificial intelligence. Zero continued. The wizard tower originally had 24 artificial tower spirits, but the tower has been corroded by the gray fog of the gap world for tens of thousands of years. Many areas inside are damaged, including the floor that stored the tower spirit data cores. The other spirits can no longer be activated.